Christmas, a time for carols and cookies, a time for families to come together, a time for giving. But the greatest gift isn't found under a tree. It isn't wrapped in shiny paper. The greatest gift comes from the heart. It's the gift of forgiveness. Forgiveness can be hard. It means letting go of anger. It means releasing the pain someone caused us. But forgiveness is also freeing. It lifts a weight from our shoulders. It allows us to heal and move forward. Christmas reminds us of this gift. It's a time of miracles, a time when hope is reborn. And what greater miracle is there than forgiveness? It mends broken hearts. It brings families back together. It allows love to triumph over anger. This is a story about forgiveness, a story about one man's journey to find peace during the most wonderful time of year. Edward loved Christmas. He loved the lights, the music, the joy in the air, but this year a shadow followed him, a shadow of guilt and regret. Edward hadn't spoken to his brother Thomas in years. A bitter argument had driven them apart. Edward thought of Thomas often. He missed their childhood games in the snow. He missed their late-night talks. But the memory of their fight lingered. The harsh words, the angry silence, it all felt too heavy to bear. He tried to lose himself in the festivities. He helped his wife, Sarah, decorate their home. He baked gingerbread cookies with their children. He even sang carols with gusto. But the joy felt hollow. A part of him remained missing. The spirit of Christmas seemed lost on him. He knew he needed to forgive Thomas, but the thought felt impossible. How could he forget the pain? How could he move on? The fight with Thomas had been years ago. It started over something trivial, a misunderstanding about a family heirloom. But it escalated quickly, fueled by years of unspoken resentments. Edward remembered the icy silence that followed, the way they avoided each other at family gatherings, the missed phone calls on birthdays. It was a slow, agonizing drift apart. He carried the weight of their broken bond like a stone in his chest. It made it hard to breathe, hard to enjoy anything fully. The Christmas lights seemed dimmer. The carols sounded melancholic. Edward knew he couldn't go on like this. He couldn't let the past ruin another Christmas. He had to find a way to forgive Thomas. But how? Where did he even begin? One evening, as Edward struggled to put up the Christmas lights, his daughter Lily came outside. She was a bright and curious girl, her eyes sparkling with the spirit of the season. "Daddy, why are you sad?" she asked, her voice innocent and pure. Edward hesitated, unsure how to explain the complicated emotions churning inside him. "Sometimes it's hard to forgive someone," he finally said, looking down at his daughter. Lily tilted her head, her brow furrowed in thought. "But Daddy," she said, "Grandma always says that forgiveness is the best gift you can give someone, especially at Christmas." Her words struck a chord within Edward. He realized that Lily was right. Forgiveness was a gift, not just to the person being forgiven, but to oneself. It was a chance to heal, to find peace. A flicker of hope ignited within him, a glimmer of possibility in the midst of his despair. The snow fell softly outside, blanketing the world in a hush. Inside, the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows. Edward sat, Lily's words echoing in his mind. Forgiveness is the best gift. He stared into the flames, memories flickering. The argument had been years ago, but the details remained etched in Edward's mind. It began innocently enough, a casual conversation about their grandfather's pocket watch. The watch, a treasured family heirloom, had been promised to Thomas, the elder brother. But as they talked, old resentments bubbled to the surface. Edward, always in Thomas's shadow, had always felt a pang of envy. He accused Thomas of taking their parents' love for granted, of not appreciating the sacrifices they had made. Thomas, his pride wounded, retaliated with cruel words. He reminded Edward of his failures, of the times he had let their parents down. The argument escalated, fueled by years of unspoken grievances. By the time the last harsh words were spoken, a chasm had opened between them. A wall of silence built brick by brick with every missed phone call, every unanswered letter, every awkward encounter at family gatherings. Edward knew he had played his part in building that wall. He knew he was as much to blame as Thomas. But the thought of being the first to reach out, to break down the wall, filled him with a paralyzing fear. The years since the argument had been a blur of missed opportunities and unspoken apologies. Edward often found himself thinking of Thomas, wondering how he was, what he was doing. He saw glimpses of his brother in the faces of his own children, heard echoes of his laughter in the wind. Christmas was the hardest time of year. The season of family and togetherness only served to highlight the empty space at their table, the missing presents that cast a shadow over their celebrations. Edward's wife, Sarah, had tried to bridge the gap between the brothers. She wrote letters, made phone calls, even invited Thomas to family gatherings. But Thomas remained distant, his replies curt, his visits infrequent and strained. Edward knew that Sarah blamed him for the rift. He saw the disappointment in her eyes, the unspoken plea for him to make things right. He wanted to, desperately, but the fear of rejection, of further pain, held him back. Section 4. A Seed of Doubt. Lily's words about forgiveness had planted a seed of doubt in Edward's mind. What if she was right? What if forgiveness was the key to unlocking the cage of his guilt and regret? He thought about what it would take to forgive Thomas. Could he forget the hurtful words, the years of silence? Could he let go of the anger and resentment that had taken root in his heart? The task seemed daunting, impossible even. But as Edward looked at his children, their faces glowing with anticipation for Christmas morning, a glimmer of hope flickered within him. He realized that he didn't want to pass on this legacy of anger and bitterness to his children. He wanted them to experience the joy of family, the unconditional love that he had once shared with his brother. A thought took root in his mind, a fragile seedling of an idea. Maybe, just maybe, this Christmas could be different. Maybe this Christmas he could find the courage to forgive, to heal the rift that had divided his family for far too long. Christmas Eve arrived, cold and crisp. The air buzzed with anticipation. Edward felt a familiar heaviness. He helped Sarah finish decorating, played with the children, but his heart wasn't in it. Sarah sensed his unease. "Why don't we go to the Christmas Eve service?" she suggested. "It might do you some good." Edward wasn't particularly religious, but he agreed. Maybe a change of scenery, the familiar rhythms of the service, would offer some solace. The church was aglow with candlelight and the scent of pine. The choir sang familiar carols, their voices soaring towards the vaulted ceiling. Edward closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. Then the pastor began his sermon. He spoke of forgiveness, of the power of letting go of anger and resentment. He spoke of the birth of Jesus as a symbol of hope, of a new beginning. Edward listened intently, his heart stirring. The pastor's words resonated deep within him, echoing Lily's simple wisdom. Could forgiveness be the miracle he desperately sought? As the choir sang the final hymn, Silent Night, a profound sense of peace settled over Edward. He thought of Thomas, not with anger or resentment, but with a newfound empathy. He realized that his brother was hurting too, trapped in the same cycle of pain and silence. He remembered a Christmas long ago, the two of them singing this very hymn together, their voices blending in youthful harmony. Back then, forgiveness had come easily, a natural part of their bond. What had happened to that easy forgiveness? When had it become so difficult to extend a hand, to bridge the gap of hurt and misunderstanding? As the last notes of the hymn faded, Edward made a decision. This Christmas, he would break the silence. He would reach out to Thomas, not with accusations or demands, but with an open heart and a willingness to forgive. He didn't know if Thomas would be receptive, but he knew he had to try. He owed it to himself, to his brother, and to the memory of Christmases past. Section 3. The Gift of Perspective. Walking out of the church hand in hand with Sarah and their children, Edward felt lighter than he had in years. The weight of his anger and resentment had lifted, replaced by a glimmer of hope and a newfound determination. The snow had stopped and the stars twinkled brightly in the clear night sky. As Edward gazed up at the vastness above, he was struck by a sense of perspective. His problems, his anger towards Thomas, seemed insignificant in the grand scheme of things. He realized that life was too short to be consumed by bitterness and regret. Christmas was a time for love, for family, for forgiveness. He had wasted too many Christmases clinging to the past. This year would be different. He squeezed Sarah's hand and smiled at his children. He felt a surge of gratitude for his family, for their love and support. He would not let the past rob him of their joy any longer. Section 4. Facing the Ghost of Christmas Present. That night, as he lay in bed, Edward couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He opened his eyes and saw a figure standing at the foot of his bed, shrouded in the shadows. The figure shimmered and wavered, its features indistinct. But Edward recognized the sadness in its eyes, the weary slump of its shoulders. It was the ghost of Christmas Present, a reflection of his own troubled heart. The ghost didn't speak, but its presence spoke volumes. It was a reminder of the pain Edward carried within him, the pain he inflicted on himself and those around him by clinging to his anger. Edward knew what he had to do. He had to confront his past, to make amends for his mistakes. He had to forgive Thomas, not for his brother's sake, but for his own. The ghost of Christmas Present faded as dawn approached, leaving Edward alone with his thoughts and a renewed sense of purpose. This Christmas he would find redemption. He would find peace. Section 1. A Brother's Shadow. Christmas morning dawned, crisp and bright. The air crackled with the joy and excitement only this day could bring. Presents lay scattered under the tree, their colorful wrappings beckoning. The aroma of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Yet, amidst the merriment, Edward felt a familiar ache in his heart. Thomas's absence hung heavy in the air, a silent reminder of the gulf that separated them. The ghost of Christmas Present had shown him the way, but the path to forgiveness was proving to be a difficult one. He watched his children unwrap their gifts, their faces aglow with delight. Their innocent joy tugged at his heartstrings. He yearned to share that same joy with his brother, to recapture the magic of Christmases past. The memory of Thomas's laughter, the echo of their shared secrets, whispered through the corridors of his mind. Edward knew he couldn't let pride and resentment rob him of the chance to rebuild their bond. After the frenzy of gift-giving subsided, Edward excused himself. He found a quiet corner in the house, away from the festive cheer. His heart pounded in his chest as he picked up the phone. Dialing Thomas's number, he took a deep breath. The familiar ring on the other end seemed to reverberate through the room, each tone heightening his anxiety. Hello? Thomas's voice, after all these years, still held a familiar cadence. It was a voice tinged with weariness, but there was a flicker of warmth beneath the surface. Thomas, it's Edward, he began, his voice catching in his throat. I just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas. Silence met his words. Edward's heart sank. Had he waited too long? Was the chasm between them too wide to bridge? Just when Edward thought the silence would consume him, Thomas spoke. Merry Christmas, Edward, he said, his voice a mere whisper. The words, though few, held a world of unspoken emotions. Years of resentment, regret, and unspoken longing seemed to hang in the air between them. Edward pressed on, his voice gaining strength. Thomas, I know I haven't been the best brother. I've made mistakes. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. I miss you. A long pause followed. Edward held his breath, his heart pounding in his ears. Then he heard a soft sigh from the other end of the line. I miss you too, Edward, Thomas finally replied, his voice thick with emotion. The ice, it seemed, had begun to thaw. Edward and Thomas spoke for a long time that Christmas day. They didn't dwell on the past, on the bitter words and hurtful actions that had driven them apart. Instead, they spoke of the present, of their families, their hopes, their dreams. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, not yet. Too much time had passed, too much water had flowed under the bridge, but it was a start, a tentative step towards healing the rift that had divided them for far too long. That evening, as Edward sat down to Christmas dinner with his family, he couldn't help but notice the empty chair at the table. It was a poignant reminder of Thomas's absence, but this time, it wasn't a symbol of pain and regret. It was a symbol of hope. Hope for a future where Christmases would once again be filled with the laughter and love of two brothers, reunited after a long and bitter winter. The new year arrived, a fresh start. Edward felt lighter. The conversation with Thomas, though short, had lifted a weight from his shoulders. He carried the memory of their shared Christmas greetings like a warm ember in his heart. He began to notice things he hadn't before. The laughter of his children seemed brighter. The warmth of Sarah's embrace felt deeper. Even the winter air, crisp and cold, held a certain sweetness. He made a resolution to nurture the fragile seedling of forgiveness he had planted. He would call Thomas more often, bridge the distance with words of kindness and shared memories. He wouldn't let the past dictate their future. It wasn't always easy. Old hurts resurfaced, doubts crept in, but Edward clung to the hope that had bloomed within him that Christmas morning. He was determined to rebuild the bridge to his brother, brick by brick, phone call by phone call. The weeks that followed were marked by hesitant steps and tentative conversations. Edward and Thomas spoke on the phone, their conversations initially brief and awkward, but slowly, the wall between them began to crumble. They talked about their families, their work, their lives. They reminisced about childhood escapades, shared jokes, and offered words of support. The laughter came easier, the silences less strained. One day, Edward received a package in the mail. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was their grandfather's pocket watch. A note accompanied it, short and to the point. "It's time." Tears welled up in Edward's eyes. It wasn't just a watch. It was a symbol of forgiveness, of a brother's love offered freely without reservation. As spring melted into summer, Edward and Thomas's bond grew stronger. They made plans to visit each other, their conversations no longer confined to the sterile distance of phone lines. Edward watched his children interact with their uncle, their faces lit up with joy. He saw the reflection of his own childhood in their shared laughter, their easy camaraderie. Forgiveness, Edward realized, wasn't a single act. It was a continuous choice, a daily commitment to letting go of the past and embracing the present. And it was a gift, not just for the recipient, but for the giver as well. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The shadow that had followed him for so long had finally lifted, replaced by the warm glow of reconciliation. That Christmas, the lights seemed to shine brighter, the carols sounded sweeter. The air buzzed with a joy that resonated deep within Edward's soul. Thomas and his family were coming to visit. The empty chair at the table would be filled. The house would echo with the sound of laughter, of stories shared, of memories made. As Edward watched his children hang ornaments on the tree, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Forgiveness had given him a second chance, a chance to heal old wounds and rebuild broken bridges. He had learned that Christmas wasn't just about presents and decorations. It was about the gift of forgiveness, the power of love to overcome even the deepest of hurts. It was a time for miracles, and the greatest miracle of all was the miracle of a brother's love, rekindled in the spirit of the season. Edward's story is a simple one, but it speaks to the heart of Christmas. It reminds us that the true meaning of the season isn't found in glittering packages or twinkling lights. It's found in the quiet moments of grace. It's found in the courage to forgive. Christmas is a time for miracles, and what greater miracle is there than the healing power of forgiveness? It mends broken hearts. It bridges divides. It allows love to triumph over anger, resentment, and pain. Edward's journey reminds us that forgiveness is a process. It's not always easy. It takes time. It takes courage. But the rewards, like the gifts under the Christmas tree, are immeasurable. Forgiveness isn't a sign of weakness. It's not about condoning hurtful actions or forgetting the past. It's about releasing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. It's about choosing to move forward, not weighed down by the chains of bitterness. When you forgive, you give yourself a gift of peace, a gift of healing. You open your heart to the possibility of reconciliation, of rekindled love, of a future free from the shadows of the past. This Christmas, as you gather with loved ones, take a moment to reflect on the true meaning of the season. Consider the gift of forgiveness. Who do you need to forgive? Who needs your forgiveness? The world can feel dark sometimes, filled with anger, division, and pain. But Christmas reminds us that even in the darkest of nights, a single light can shine brightly. Forgiveness is that light. It has the power to illuminate even the deepest wounds, to melt the iciest of hearts. It can bring families back together, mend broken friendships, and heal the wounds of the past. This Christmas, let the light of forgiveness shine in your heart. Let it guide your actions. Let it inspire you to reach out to those who have hurt you, to offer words of kindness, to extend a hand of reconciliation. For in giving the gift of forgiveness, you might just receive the greatest gift of all, the miracle of a love renewed, a bond strengthened, a heart healed in the spirit of the season.